Okay, so today is our sixth session of the 4-H orientation, and the two topics that I want to talk about today are basic event management, and then also I added a new one about service learning, and kind of trying to help counties understand or give you some resources that you can use to help clubs when they're preparing for service projects. So we're going to start with let me make sure it's up on my computer, with the basic event management. My computer is just being goofy today. It has been all day. All right, so, and then I need to do two things. I need the chat box up so I can see everybody. And then I want the participant list so I know when new people joined. Okay. So we're going to talk about the basic event management piece. So with this, there's some really good resources out there, especially for people that are brand new and have never really planned events before, or maybe just need a little bit of an organization when planning them. I know they've helped me out a lot when I need that organization. So I want you to consider these tips to help make the event planning easier. It really has, it's taken me a while to find some of these, but essentially when we're thinking about event management, and our goal is positive youth development, but we also know that we do manage a lot of events. And so, we always say there's certain things about being a 4-H staff person or even a volunteer that are overwhelming. And one of those is that piece when we have to plan something. So in 4-H, we tend to do a lot of planning. We plan for projects, we plan for fundraising activities, we plan for community service, and then we plan for those 4-H events. So there's no reason. One of the ways, just a few, some of these are some tips for you. One of them is to stay organized. So, things like a binder or notebook or a folder, something for the event that you plan. I am a binder person. So almost everything I have goes into a binder, and I find even myself, I have to, if I don't stay on top of that, then I tend to get a little overwhelmed, like I'm feeling like right now, because my desk has got papers all over it, and I was like, okay, I've got to get this, and I've got to get it organized. And so for me, it's, yes, and the PowerPoints are archived, Sarah. I'll put them in the box, so you'll have these. But so we've got, we've got this, you've got the notes, you can keep track of everything. If when you call different companies, whatever, it's a good way, to me, it's just a really good way. And like, even for each session of the orientation, I do a binder, and then I put notes in it if I need to, and I separate all of the different pieces. It just helps keep me organized. It's about the main way that it can happen. The other one is when we're thinking about programs and we're thinking about events. We talked about this a little bit when we were talking about evaluation. You need to think about, why are you doing that event? And this is, know why you're holding it. In other words, what are the goals or the objectives for that? And what do you hope that the attendees get out of it? That's the other piece. If you can't answer those two, if you can't come up with any goals and objectives more than because we've always done it, then probably it's time to look at that look at that event and decide, that maybe it's not maybe it's not right for that moment. To create a committee. When you think about the essential elements of positive youth development, or even our 4-H policies and procedures, they all talk about a lot about youth being involved and youth being engaged in their own learning. And so as you're creating committees for these different events, it's always it's a good thing to have youth on those planning committees. And, you know, when we talk a lot in youth adult partnerships about you need to have more than just one token youth. You really need to have, you know, it really should be an equal amount youth to adult. We know that that doesn't always happen. And so it's okay to have, you know, to have 2 or 3, 4 youth on a committee. And then, you know, that way you have a couple that do show up. You know, that hopefully you'll get a couple that are able to come. Because if you just have one, they tend not to talk. So, and have them involved in that event planning. You know, they learn, and what it does for them is it gives them leadership skills and teaches them how to hold a successful event when they're involved in that planning. To communicate. So, you know, the one thing, let your committees know what you need. If you're looking at, you know, if it's just one committee, or if it's, you know, maybe you have a big event and you have a fundraising committee and you have a, you know, committee that works on the meals and the special events, and you have a committee that works on the program and those types of things. You want to make sure that you're asking, you know, you're making sure you're telling all of them what you need from them. And the thing that, you know, and I'm still working on this as you know, throughout my life, is delegating those tasks. Sometimes it's like, oh, it's just easier for me to do it rather than having someone else do it, you know, but you have to delegate those tasks, especially in event planning. You know, it's just something that, will save you a lot of grief and save you know, everybody a lot of grief. So, and it may seem, you know, like the task is really small, but when you engage that entire committee and get them involved in it, then they feel like they have that, they have ownership in it, and you're getting them, you know, and a lot of times one of our objectives is to have, you know, make our youth and make our volunteers feel like they're part of something larger. And so that does that. It gives them that piece. Even if it's, you know, decorations on the tables or making the copies of the program, those types of things, people love to do that. Staying on task. This is probably the one that throws me off the most. You know, a lot of you have seen my to-do list, and it just, you know, it just keeps expanding. And so, but, you know, you have to stay really on task. I found 3 resources that I think are really good. And I'm actually going to share 2 of these. And I'm going to have both of these documents in the Dropbox, or in the box file that I put them in. So that way you guys can, you know, that way everybody has access to them. Okay. So let me go back. So the first one is this one's out of California, and it's a 4-H program activity and event planning outline. It's just a very simple outline, but what it does is it gives you you know, you can say what the activity is. And actually, it gives you objectives, the dates, the times. It gives, you know, a place to write down the facility and who the contact is. The other piece that this does is, not only if you fill this out, not only if you know, if for some reason you're not planning this event the next year, it gives that information to the next person so that they don't have to recreate. You know, I don't know how many times when I stepped into a county position, you know, it's like, oh, we're, you know, next, or in 2 months is is our achievement day, and here's where we always do it, and blah blah blah. But I had no contact information. I had to just basically start at the beginning. So it gives you that good information. Here, committee members, it gives you that information. The other one, this one I'll actually go through a little bit more in detail. So I'm going to share a different one with you. There's one from Ohio that I think is good too. It's not the checklist like this one is. It's more of just like a fact sheet. but again, you know, it's got guides to planning 4-H programs. So it talks a lot about these pieces, and these are really good resources to share with our volunteers, because a lot of times, you know, it's a little overwhelming for our volunteers too when they're trying to plan some of these events. So again, you know, I'll have this in the book, or in the box, for you guys to be able to download. So this one's more at the club level, which is a good resource guide to share with your volunteers. So let's go back to okay, I'm going to get rid of these two. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. So, and then there's another one from Florida that I do not have a copy of, but I'm going to make a note to find that one and put it into that box file. So that way you guys have got that. Okay, so to look at that California event planning guide, so again, it gives you, you know, those places to put down some of that vital information. So, you know, if something happens in the next year you're not able to plan, it's there for the next person. Again, our committee information, you know, I think it's great that we have a phone number, because how many times, you know, do we need to call somebody or email somebody and you have to look up their phone number or look up their email? That makes it, you know, it makes it just a lot simpler when we're able to do that, when it's all right there in whatever filing system you decide to do. So it also gives a place for notes for the committee members. So, you know, during the committee meetings, if you wanted to write down some notes, or, you know, as you're working with the committee members, if you've got a couple of committee members that are not pulling their weight, maybe you don't, you know, maybe you can do it without pulling them off the committee. But in this little, you know, in this section, you could actually write down, you know, Susie Smith didn't follow through with her responsibilities or whatever, you know, so the next person again can pick it up, or the next year you can remember that. So questions about responsibilities. So you use this section to write down questions. You know, we all know that when we're planning an event, or, you know, in between meetings, we have questions, and maybe we need, you know, maybe they can wait until the next committee meeting, or maybe, you know, it's just kind of gives you that place to write it down. So again, you've got that location. You know, that's better than having 3,000 pieces of paper or sticky notes, or, you know, you're probably going to have those too, but again, it's right there. Then you've got things about, so this is a planning checklist. So if you're doing publicity for the event, you know, you can put in the dates that you sent out the flyers, the dates that the news releases were sent out. There's actually, I believe, I guess I don't see it in here. I thought that there was a place that you could actually put, but what you could do is on here, yeah, it says attach a copy of the contacts and the address information for all of those, you know, for the radio, TV, newspapers, if you've got those, or who you contact to get that stuff out. You know, in our case, a lot of times, Claudine or our communications team will send out those news releases for us. And so, but you know, you can keep track of all of that. If you need to send out postcards, or send out email and notifications, or if you put it on social media is not on here yet, but that's something you could add to that document, you know, when it was posted on social media. And then the facilities, you know, a copy of the contract. And just to remind everybody again that if you are planning on using a facility that is not owned by the university, and they want you to sign a contract for that, you cannot sign those contracts. Those have to go through the university, and I think it's through purchasing. What you do is you get a hold of Dan Brush, and he usually will, he can tell you, typically what he does is has you send it to him, and then he sends it on to the right person to get signed. So, you know, we always laugh because I think it's Bill Payne said one time in a meeting, he can't even sign contracts on behalf of the university. So that is, and if you sign a contract and something happens, and there's because a lot of times what happens is there's phrases in in other groups' contracts that are not conducive with our guidelines, or not. Okay, yeah. So Sarah, thank you. In the northern area, you go through Carla first, and that's great. And I'm guessing in the southern area, it's probably Lisa. I'm guessing it's probably Lisa, but if not, I can always find out for you who you need to contact. But it's really critical that we not sign contracts, because if something happens and you've signed that contract and not the university, they may not back you up, if it goes to court or whatever. It's that's why I really try to make sure everybody has that understanding. If there's a facility cost, what that is, it just kind of, like I said, it just puts it all in one place. If you've got a program for that event, what date does it need to be done in order to have it printed, or if it's a PowerPoint, to have it ready? Is there cover artwork? Who's doing that? The content, who's doing that? And again, this is really, this needs to probably be updated for using more technology, but again, you can adapt it. And then equipment needs, we always know that we need lots of equipment. So this is your space to put in that equipment needs. Things like, awards, what do I need to bring? If there's anything in the program, if you need to remember, the gavel, any of that stuff, this would be a place that you could put it in there. And that's probably the one that I always, it seems like I always forget something. So I need to go back to this type of model and start using something like that. If you have to rent something, it gives you a place to put the address and the phone number. So if it doesn't show up, or if you show up and the place is closed, you can get a hold of somebody. And then here is, looking at the activity or the planning outline. So like an example would be statewide training. I always do what's called a trainer's agenda with that, where it may have, it has specific times, it has what the topic is, who's teaching that session, and then underneath really what more of what's happening in that. Or, like I think about State Leaders Forum. Everybody had a kind of a piece of the puzzle, or they would have had we got a little bit closer to the actual event. Excuse me. Sorry. But you could, here's where you actually have that contact information. And then you have those finishing touches. So, remembering the certificates and the awards, making sure that you can attach the winner scores and the awards on the back. Provide those descriptions of the awards. We were just talking about with the state livestock contest, or any of our state contests, we have our list of what we ordered in the past, but I think it's, I was telling Francis that we need to sit down and actually make a list of all the awards that go with each contest, not just, like how many medals we ordered or that type of thing. So that way, and keep it in a binder so that we've got that information. And, we don't forget year after year. And then any sponsors that you have, you can actually have that list typed up, and then what they sponsored, so that not only can you recognize them at the event, but you can also do the thank you notes at the end. I think that's really, those are so important anymore. A copy of the program for your records. And then if you have a sign-in sheet, with many of our 4-H events, we do a sign-in sheet, and, making sure, putting a copy of the sign-in sheet in the notebook. And then again, the thank you notes, when were those thank you notes sent out, and attach a list of who you sent them to. And then it gives you that place for suggested changes to the event. I think that's another piece that, I just got the suggestions from the Animal Science Committee. They had a meeting this morning about the state livestock contest. And they had 2 full pages typed up of notes of things that can be fixed or things that could be different next time we do it. And so, you know, it's always good, not only during the event to have a, you know, if you can carry around a notebook and as you see something happening, you can make that note instead of, I don't know about the rest of you, but when I try to make a mental note, it goes in and it goes out about 2 minutes later. This morning we were driving to school and Cody and I were talking about something I wanted him to do this summer. And I said, Cody, remind me about this because I'm going to forget it the minute I drop you off at school, I'm going to forget what we were talking about. So because his brain keeps information a little bit longer than mine does anymore. But, you know, it's those types of things that are really, you know, it's good to have like something there that you can keep those notes and that they're always there. And then, you know, again, evaluate the event. So a couple of different ways you can, I think it's good to evaluate in a couple of different ways. One, have a follow-up meeting with your event committee so that they can go over what was positive, what should be changed, you know, what did they like, what didn't they like? And, you know, and then also talk to your participants. You know, it's not always feasible to do an evaluation of the whole event, but maybe we do an evaluation, or maybe you just talk to a few people, or maybe, you know, because it doesn't have to be a formal survey to get those ideas of how, you know, for that evaluation. It can be just a conversation with them. You want to make sure you get a broad representation, not just the same people and the same opinions all the time. You know, you want to make sure that you're also getting the others, maybe people that weren't so happy. And then, you know, again, look at that. And what happened that you didn't necessarily plan for? You know, thinking about what are things that you didn't plan that happened. And, you know, you're always going to have those. And then, you know, just to kind of wrap up, proper event planning really helps make that event more enjoyable for everybody that's involved, you know, and we have to remember that we're not alone. You know, we have staff and volunteers and youth and parents and families who are willing to help, you know, with the creation of the events and meeting those goals and meeting those objectives of the event. You know, it's always, you know, try to get them involved as much as possible. We can't do our jobs without them most of the time. Okay, any questions on, I mean, that's, again, the quick and dirty on event management, but I do, you know, I'm going to have those documents for you in the box. Hopefully helps with a little bit of that planning and that thought process behind you know, thinking about things ahead of time. The other one that's not on that needs to be added is if it is any kind of event that has a semi-risky program, you need to be thinking about a risk management plan. In fact, I'm going to make a note on my PowerPoint to put a copy of a risk, you know, a basic risk management checklist so that people can think about that. Because I think that's also important to look at. And I've got several examples. So, okay, any questions on that? I know with, you know, those of you that are on, I know Sharon, Sarah, you guys have been doing this, Sandy, you guys have been doing this a long time. Any tips or hints or things that you want to share? Is there a registration that we should also, oh yes, the assumption of risk. With the registration, that needs to be included as well. Yes, and I'm guilty of that. I forget about that one, honestly. So, and I wish I could have you guys with microphones, but it just doesn't. This is goofy. This system's a goofy system. But yeah, list maker, yes. I'm a list maker too. And what I liked about the California Planning Guide is I tend to make lists, but they don't necessarily make sense. So it kind of puts it in a format that makes sense. Because if somebody else were to plan some of the things after I've planned them, they may not understand my lists. So that's one of the reasons why, like I said, why I like that one. So, and I wrote down assumption of risk, Sarah, to include that as well. So people have got that one. Okay. Oh, good. Yeah. So Sarah said in the event, for events in Washoe County, they always do an after action report and utilize it for the next event. And that's a great plan. That's a great idea. Always, because by the time that event comes up the next year, you forget all of those things that happen. For sure. All right. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next one. And this is the service. So, I lost you guys there for a second. Sorry, my computer likes to be goofy some days. So the service to community component, or I actually found the term, what was it? Community service learning event, or I can't remember, service, I think that's what it was, community service learning event. What I'm going to talk about in this one, sorry, I got to get, every time I switch screens, I have to get my chat box back up, is we're going to look at the, look at community service, look at service learning, and try to explain the difference between those two. And then also talk about ways that you can help your clubs or yourself at the county level plan for a service project. So I really like this, by Gandhi, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. So just some terms that are used in community or service to community, or you're going to see, I don't usually use the term community service because there can be some negative connotations with that with young people when you use that term. And so that's one of the reasons why you won't hear me say that very often. Usually I say service to community, but you have volunteerism. So those are people who decide to perform service to others without pay. So volunteers serving in their community. Then you have community service. This is where it kind of gets into that. It's community volunteering, but many times when you use the term community service, it's because it's a result of a court order or a probation sentence. And so again, that's why when you tell, a lot of times if you tell a young person, hey, we're going to do community service, they're like, why? We didn't get in trouble for anything. So again, and then you have the youth service, which is really that overarching term, or, that really gets those youth as resources involved in their community. And then, of course, experiential education. When you talk about service learning, there is a component that brings in that experiential education. So the definitions of, I'm going to talk first about service learning, and then I'm going to talk about community service. So really the service learning is a method that we use for young people or for individuals to get out and develop, a sense of their community. It's really organized. It meets the community needs. And the thing that makes community service and service learning different is with service learning, you have an educational component. Doesn't mean that the service project has to be we want it to be semi-educational, but they can still, clean up grass or clean up a park or whatever. But what happens is when they finish the service project, Then you get together as a group, and this is where the experiential learning comes in. You talk about, you know, they do, and then they reflect on the activity, reflect on their service, and then they apply it. So, you know, how could you use the skills that you gained today in other situations? And you have them start thinking about that. And it's really that reflection piece is a big part. What I like about service learning compared to community service is it really helps the volunteers, both adults and youth, to think about what are their personal strengths or what are their personal interests. You know, when you go in and volunteer, a lot of times you're doing it, and especially young people are doing it to gain knowledge about potential careers or to gain job skills, and they may find that, you know, they don't want to do that at all. You know, I had a lot of when I was in the county in Michigan, I had a lot of kids that want, I mean, just like everywhere, a lot of kids want to be veterinarians. You know, we know that that's not the case. What one in every, I don't know what the statistic is, but of all the kids I've had over the years, and it's been you know, that I've worked with over the years, I've had 2 of them actually become 3 of them actually become veterinarians. Now, granted, there's probably more that I don't know about, but for the most part of that is so our local veterinarians would allow high school students to come in and volunteer and do some job shadowing and kind of learn about the profession a little bit. And we had several that decided that that wasn't for them. And so it was that service piece that they or they would go into, you know, the animal shelter and do service in the animal shelter, and they realized that they don't like to be around sick animals. And so you have to really, you know, it's good for them to reflect on that. And then there's 3 different types of service learning. So there's direct service, indirect, and then there's advocacy. So I'm going to just quickly talk about. So with direct service, those are where you actually provide assistance to the members of the community. So that's when you go into the, you know, if you've got groups that go into nursing homes and that they, you know, maybe they talk with, you know, whatever the activity is, or they have that, you know, they go in and they work with the residents of that facility. Or they go into a homeless, you know, another example, is they go into the homeless shelter and they work with people. We don't typically have that a lot in our 4-H program, but maybe this could be one where maybe they're collecting supplies for the homeless shelter, and you know, they don't necessarily go in or no, that one's a different one, sorry. But you know, maybe they serve meals, you know, in the shelter on Thanksgiving, those types of things. What's really good though is like if they did, you know, because I know I have some friends who go and serve meals on Thanksgiving at the shelter here, or one of the places that serves meals. And what's really good about that is when you're done, then you bring the kids together and you talk about, you know, so what you guys find out, you know, and it's really interesting to see their eyes open. Okay, Sarah, good. I'm glad that I'm glad that you have kids that regularly serve food at the local shelter. Have them, you know, and hopefully they're talking about that experience. And it's always really interesting because a lot of times they don't think of the homeless as actual people. I mean, I know I deal with that all the time, and you know, it's good for them to actually interact and find, you know, they are people and they do have feelings and they do have, you know, they do have concerns. Then you have the indirect. So this is when you're involved behind the scenes. So this is when maybe you have a group that is collecting supplies for, maybe they're doing a food drive for the food bank, or they're collecting supplies for the homeless shelter or the animal shelter, or those types of things. They're doing that service. They're doing that service, but they're not directly working with the people. Yeah, Sarah, good. I'm glad. That is such a humbling experience for young people, and it's a good thing, I think, to, you know, have them do some of those pieces. So again, you know, collecting food for the local food pantry. And then you have the advocacy. So that's where you're really, where you have a group that's seeking to resolve an issue that's facing the community. So the example here is, sorry, my mouse won't move. is they're advocating for sidewalk curb cuts for the disabled, so that the disabled are able to to go on the sidewalks. I know I was just reading about a group in Moscow. It was posted on Facebook because it was one of our friends in Moscow. It was their daughter who really worked on getting playground equipment for disabled youth in one of the parks in Moscow. And that's an example of advocacy service project. I think she did it as her senior project, but it was still, a service, and it was that advocacy piece. So the community service versus service learning is really where community service is not really integrated into the curriculum. It's just simply service. You're not having any kind of educational component, which I think it's okay. Like I think about when the Secretary of Agriculture went to Clark County a few months ago, and we did a big, we asked for young people to come and help serve the food they did a luncheon for him. The Farm Bureau sponsored a luncheon, and we had 4-Hers come in and serve the food. That is truly community service. They did not have, there really wasn't any education afterwards or during, there was education because they had a great opportunity to interact with Secretary Perdue, but it really wasn't a service learning. And then, with service learning, you've got that it's a lot of times they are designed to promote the curriculum and that it's supporting the project. This is pretty academic sounding, but it supports that project that the kids are doing. So maybe if they're in maybe a lot of times with our small animals, we have a lot of our groups that go into the shelter and volunteer at shelters. And so that's, that fits right in with their curriculum, what they're learning in their project. Or, they may do, it just depends on what it is. I can't think of any more examples right now. And then the importance of service in 4-H youth development, to me, it's community service learning. I kind of like that term a little bit. It kind of brings it, but it's really that blend of that organized service and then established learning goals. I really like it when I see clubs that try to tie in what they're learning in their project with their service project. It doesn't always happen, and I think we need to, service to community is really important just in general, but it's really kind of neat when they can do that because they're gaining. Remember, for those of you that were at the training on Tuesday, I talked about the career readiness, and we're not always we don't always address it directly. It's kind of an indirect way of doing it. And this way, a lot of times if it's related to their project, then they might be getting some of those, that direct, related to maybe a potential career. And it's all, it also gives them that chance to that reflection time, and find out what they learned about that service. And so again, I think it's always good for kids to learn that, to have that reflection time. Then the elements, so this is going into kind of those elements of effective programs. And so these are things, as you're working with clubs, or if you're planning a service project in your own community, this is things that you could, you need to make sure that it engages the youth, that they're not just standing around doing nothing. Which I've seen projects do that, where you plan a service project and, you say, okay, everybody show up, and, you really only need 5 people, and there's 50 people that show up. That's not a lot of fun. The one that I can remember the most was we were painting garbage cans at the fairgrounds. It was not a service learning project. It was truly community service. But or truly service to community. It was not, we were not mandated to do it, but they we had probably, it was my teen council, and there was, I don't know, 20 garbage cans to paint. It took about, I mean, there was probably 20 kids that showed up. We really only needed about 10, because what it turned into was all of us were covered from head to toe of green paint, because there was so many kids there and we got it done so quickly. It just ended up being everybody had a lot of free time on their hands. And so while it was a lot of fun, and this was when I first started in my career, so I wasn't too much older than the kids, so I was having a good time, getting them all painted too. But you want to make sure that they're all engaged. That's the point. You want to make sure that it's meaningful service, that they're going to feel proud of what they did. We all know that young people will call us on an activity or an event if it is not meaningful to them, or if it doesn't have purpose. To help them, if it's really good if it helps to develop their problem-solving skills. That's always a good one as well. And that they can apply the skills that they learned. That it requires cooperation. That's, we have so much competition a lot of times in our 4-H program that I think it's really good. This is where we kind of balance that cooperation with competition and have them working together. And then it includes reflection. So again, the important elements. So involve youth in all aspects of the project experience. So have them help identify what are some service projects that they want to do. What are the goals? How are they going to accomplish those goals? And then working with them to meet those specific learning outcomes. And then also, pairing them up with those adult mentors. So again, allowing 4-Hers to be involved in the planning stage rather than just presenting the project to them and expecting them to carry it out. So select a project that 4-H members think is important. So, make sure, if you feel your club should focus on a project that consists of writing to legislators about a local community initiative, do the 4-Hers feel like that's important, or do they want to develop pamphlets for the local schools or to hand out in the community about the hazards of drinking and driving? So again, have them think about those things. I think it's always really good. And a lot of times they have a good grasp on what's happening in their communities. So set project goals that are clear but not too challenging. So an example, think about the ages of your 4-H members and what the needs are in your community. Maybe it isn't, you've got, so here, I love this example of maybe you have if you've got a group of younger 4-Hers, I know a lot of our clubs are like 9 to 13. 9 to 12 is the age of the 4-Hers. I mean, that's our biggest age group. So maybe they're creating posters and they're doing just short presentations at schools about air quality rather than developing a school-based program on invasive species control. And, that's a little bit extreme, but again, those are the types of things. Our young people that go to National 4-H Conference, now, what they do there is, these are high school students, so they're working together in a team and they're creating a presentation to then present to our federal agencies, our federal agency partners. That is very appropriate for a high school. Would I ask anybody under the age of probably 14 to do that? Probably not, because they just don't have the same skill or the same abilities. They don't have the same thought process to be able to think through. I have an example. So my son had to write a paper at school about a controversial issue. And so of course, the topic he picked was very controversial, especially right now. And I was going through it and reading it over and doing my edits, etc. And it sounded like a 13-year-old wrote it. It was very argumentative. It was very, and I had his dad read it and he thought the same thing. And so we had to sit down and have that conversation about, how do you approach this in a mature manner? And, with the older, when you have the older youth, they have those abilities to do that. That's in their brain development. So we have to think about those types of things. So plan a project that's appropriate for the age level. If you've got a club that's mostly clover buds, you want to focus on a simple project. Maybe it is just cleaning up trash at the local park. But again, you can bring in the service learning component to that, where they talk about, when you talk about recycling and you talk about the importance of keeping your, not throwing trash down when when you're done with a wrapper, don't throw it on the ground. Maybe finding the nearest trash can. It's the, because, and I think that those are really good ways to get the younger kids involved. Probably that would be, that'd take 5 minutes for older kids. And so you want to think of something a little bit more challenging for that group. So helping clubs plan service events. There's 3 documents in here that I've listed here that I will be sharing with you that I think are all really, really good documents. One of them is the Conducting Community Service Learning Projects is it's about, well, let me look. I've got it right here. It is a 39-page document that goes into step-by-step and gives a lot of detail. And so I think, and that's a good one. It's actually designed kind of as a workbook that you could give. It's a youth leader's guide, but it's designed as a workbook, and you could work through it with the kids. And then the Conducting a Service Learning Project is really a fact sheet, and then they have the checklist, or planning a service learning fact sheet and the checklist. So again, just a couple of pieces to help, with that. And with this, I've kind of combined them a little bit, but again, when you're planning a service project, these are things that we need to remember. You should identify a coordinator for the project. If this is a club doing the project, maybe they have a community service leader within their, not an adult leader, but a youth leader, or an officer that is community service or service learning. You want to make sure that you have those dates set. You have a beginning and an end date. That they think through the goals. Again, you're going to you want to look through this. The one thing I've learned is on this, especially, it says periodically check the progress of the project assignments, the progress of the project assignments. So one thing that I have learned over the years is if you just assign something to someone and then you don't have periodic check-ins, like meetings or that type of thing, then it tends to get thrown to the side and you don't get it, you don't get it done. Many projects, I found that I have to have those regularly scheduled meetings or I don't get the work done. It just keeps getting pushed down on my to-do list. And young people are just the same. So if you have to raise funds for the service project, there are service projects that cost money. You need to have the young people think about developing that budget and establish those policies, looking at the use of the 4-H name and emblem. What can we, what can and can't we use it for? You want to think about, all of those pieces. Have them start thinking about potential donors for that. And then making sure that accurate records are kept. Publicizing the event. So, it's always good to publicize your service project, whether it's prior to or after. And so letting the community know that what the club is doing. You can do that through PSAs, through the radio, through news releases, through flyers, on the community bulletin boards. You can put information in newsletters. You can send that information to community leaders and organizations. And then information on websites and social media. And so, just letting people know that these things are going on. I think it's really, I think that that's a good thing. And, young people can be doing these things. you can have young people learning how to write press releases. Maybe that you have them work with an adult that knows how to do that. And then, there's always somebody, you don't want to just send it off blindly. You want to make sure that it's being reviewed. And then my favorite thing, controlling risk, because you guys all know that I talk about risk all the time, but you want to make sure that you're looking at reducing that risk. You're looking at those hazards that might happen. You're thinking about the emergency procedures, all of those pieces, that there's adequate supervision. I think about when we were doing the garbage cans. It was me and 20 teens, and that was the only adults because I was the adult in charge of that group. Probably should have had another one there just because it got a little crazy, but it was fun and we didn't make a big mess. We had to clean up a little bit, but not too bad. But you think about that. Or if you've got a whole group of clover buds, cleaning up the park, you probably want to have a few adults to be patrolling them. And then you want to make sure, that you have if you're doing something that goes beyond if you've got people that are not in the club that do not already have the accident or the medical insurance, the accident insurance that you can purchase, or if, you want to make sure you have that. And then you want to make sure if it's something that you need a consent or a permission slip for, that you've got those. And then if you avoid the risk, if you've decided that it's just too much, it's too risky. And then evaluating the project. So, things like, and having the young people, this is kind of that reflection piece. What did you learn? What did you accomplish? I know not every kid likes to talk about, what were your feelings, or, but you can rephrase that to a point where they like that. What were the successes of the project and what could they improve on? Was it worth, if it cost you money to do that project, was it worth it? And then would they do it again? I think that's always, again, this is that reflection piece, and that's a really critical piece. And then the celebration and recognition and reporting. So, I think it's always really important to celebrate those successes. So, whether it's a pizza party, after you're done, maybe you all get together and have a pizza party, or it's an article in the newsletter, or maybe at the end of the club year, for for those kids that participated in the service projects, or maybe, if they participated in 6 hours of service projects, they get a certificate of some kind. Or, in extreme cases, it could be a reward field trip. When they get 20 hours of service, then we're going to take a field trip to, someplace, or maybe a plaque. And when you look at who should be recognized, the youth and adult volunteers that were there helping need to be recognized. The program coordinators, the parents, the teachers, administrators, if you're working with a school, then that could be, the agencies that you partnered with. One thing you could do at the end of the year is invite all of the agencies that you participated. This could be, at the county level. I'm thinking at Achievement Night, ask the clubs to submit the names of the agencies that they did service with for the year, and invite a representative to come to Achievement Night, and then recognize them for being a partner in 4-H that year. Simple certificate, but it might go a long way. Anybody that don't, that provided any funding or donations for that. That's a really good thing. It's always good. Thank you notes, critical, just a handwritten thank you note, but also, maybe think of some creative ways. So I wanted us to think about what are some ideas for service projects that we could work with, that we could suggest. So anybody, and these are some of the areas, anybody think of within communication and expressive arts, what's a service project that our clubs could be doing? You can type it in the chat box. And if you don't, I think the chat box should still pop up on the bottom of your screen. So communication and expressive arts, anybody have any ideas? Kids can paint over graffiti, yep, and then paint a mural with a local artist. I like that idea. The one I was thinking of too was a lot of times expressive arts includes the knitting and the crocheting, and so they could knit or crochet blankets for the local hospitals or the local shelters or for the police department to give to young, to kids that they have to take into custody to send into foster. What about leadership and personal development? That should be, or teddy bears, yes. They could even sew, those would be family consumer science, but they could sew, if they could sew teddy bears or give teddy bears. Yeah. How about leadership and personal development? Anybody else have any ideas there? Okay, kids going to the shelter, yes. That could be leadership and personal development, citizenship. But careers and economic education. Local boards, yeah, see if their local boards have a youth leadership unit, yes. And that's an advocacy one that our clubs, especially if you have teen groups, talking to the community about getting a youth board to look at community issues. I can't remember what they're called. I think everybody has different names for them, but those are great ways, kids can do advocacy within their communities. So it's really just, animal science. I know we all have lots of ideas in animal science. We have lots of ideas. Food, nutrition, and health could be, natural resources and environmental education. Those are all ones that are pretty easy to come up with ideas. But the other piece is I do have a list of examples of some service projects. So, and I'll be sharing it with individuals as well. So. Any other thoughts that people have about service or about service to community or community service learning, however you want to phrase it? I think if that really needs to be an important part in the club program. We really need to make sure that our clubs are incorporating the service into their regular schedule. It's one of those, even if we, even when we move to these short-term spin clubs, even if there's 6 weeks, there's some service that they could be doing. You think about camps, there's things that they could be doing for service at camp. There's things, there's always ways to be doing service. And I think it's really important. And as you look at the Tufts study with the results from that, and one of the things that they found that sets 4-H apart from the other youth organizations or youth programs is that contribution, and the fact that we focus so much on contribution and service that the others not as much. And so I think, to me, I really hold that high, and I think it's critical because we know one of my friends did his dissertation on 4-H and FFA youth and their contribution and their leadership, and if they went on as adults, if they became civically involved in their community, if they became, if they were involved in their community and I think that is, and he found, yes, they are. And, we need that because so often people aren't willing to volunteer and step up, and we need to instill that. We always joke, I always joke with people, and there's a group of us, they're like, Carrie, can you ever say no to, I'm usually like my son's my son, you know, I'm usually team mom, or, you know, I'm always involved in his activities in one way or another as a volunteer. And they're like, well, why do you do that? And I said, because it's been instilled in me through my job. I know how difficult it is, and I just automatically step up, and, you know, because it's the way. My husband and I have disagreements about that, because I'm always like, well, we need to volunteer for this. And he's like, why? We don't need to. And I'm like, yes, we do, because that's what you do. And so I think it's part of what we are, you know, what is instilled in us, and also, you know, in our young people. So any questions about service? Any other thoughts I should say about service, or the importance of service? Like I said, I think it's a critical piece, and I think we need to, we have to make sure that all of our clubs are doing some type of service. All right. If there's any other questions about the topics today. Yeah. We also need to lead by example. Exactly. If we don't volunteer, they won't either. I agree completely, Sarah. It is, like I said, you know, I just think it's so important to do that. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, then we're done a half an hour early today. That makes up for all those other times that I was late getting done. So, so have a great rest of the week, and I'll let you guys go.